After the success of Call of Duty 4 in 2007, Infinity Ward heads Vince Zampella and Jason West sought for creative control of the Modern Warfare series. Activision agreed, and Modern Warfare 2 was released in 2009. One condition of this, however, was that should Zampella and West be fired for any reason, that any bonuses would be forfeit and control would land squarely with Activision. In March 2010, Zampella and West were fired for breach of contract and insubordination. Shortly after, the duo filed a $36 million lawsuit against Activision, claiming that it was all a fix and the company had manufactured a reason in order to fire them. This ended up being proven false in court. However, Activision was found to have had a plan from before Modern Warfare 2 had even released out the pair, due to suspicions that they would leave the company to go work for a close competitor, taking Modern Warfare with them. 1 month after this, in April 2010, Respawn Entertainment was formed as an independent studio with EA on board as a publisher through their EA Partners division. The first game they released was Titanfall. Launching exclusively on Xbox One and PC in March 2014, Titanfall was an online multiplayer-only sci-fi first-person shooter, where players control pilots of monolithic mechs or Titans and fight to control the colonies of the frontier. Gameplay predominantly consists of 6-on-6 multiplayer matches across various modes, most of which will be immediately familiar to anyone who's played Call of Duty, or pretty much any other online first-person shooter for that matter. Story was woven into the matches. The various conflicts of the Interstellar Manufacturing Corporation, or IMC, and the Frontier Militia, with cutscenes playing out before and after matches.
Turret online and operational, sir. All sample grade. Shooter 3 shows multiple jump signatures. 3 clicks out.
Blisk, tell Ricks to get his squad on the deck now. Sir, our forces have assembled at Ready Point Alpha. Pilots, today you have a chance to establish peace on the frontier. Make it count.
All pilots secure hardpoints Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. The rest of you, on me.
The story was used from both sides. When one had been completed, it unlocked the other. The campaign playlist runs on a loop, so that it's impossible to miss any mission within it, given enough time, even if that does mean you might play a few missions a couple of times before getting to the end. Combat is fast and reactive. While on foot, pilots can wall run and double jump, and there's a huge amount of verticality to the maps to take advantage of this. They have access to a relatively standard array of weaponry, assault rifles, submachine guns, pistols, etc., as well as a heavy slot for an anti-Titan weapon, such as a grenade launcher. By contrast, Titans are slow and clunky by design, but that's relative. They both feel somewhat similar, only Titan's movement speed is slower for its size, but have access to devastating weaponry. They don't have access to a sprint per se, but a short boost that has to recharge once it's used.
Encrypting the full transmission. Here's what I've got.
We're falling back to higher ground. We're falling back to carriers. The Odyssey is our only weakness.
I know that voice. I've heard it somewhere before. I'm gonna run voice analysis.
See, the game doesn't restrict you to either one mode of transportation or the other. It is entirely possible for a pilot to take down an unaware Titan, and while it can be difficult, the second an enemy Titan spots you while you're on foot, it's probably going to lead to a death within a few seconds. It isn't impossible, and can lead to some fantastic, tense cat and mouse situations, with the pilot stalking a Titan that is actively hunting for them. Titans are a timer for each player. This can be reduced by getting kills. Once the timer has expired, the pilot can call on their Titan at will and jump on board, or they can wait until their next death and respawn immediately in it. Interestingly, Titans can be disembarked at any point, and the Titan will continue to fight of its own volition, either until it's destroyed or the owner renews control. It can create some interesting combat scenarios, where a Titan can be deployed to defend an area while its pilot flanks and holds an objective. It's worth stating though, that their AI isn't the best, and will basically just hold a general position and attack anything that gets nearby, so it's probably best not to rely on it too much. When a Titan's armor hits 0, it isn't immediately destroyed. A short timer appears signifying that you've got a limited time to eject before its power plant explodes. During this time, a pilot can eject and live to fight another day, or continue to fight for a short time, using the Doom Titan as a makeshift bomb, taking down anyone in the immediate vicinity. There are a series of unlockable power-ups called burn cards. These are single-use modifiers that give various boosts to the pilot, such as reduces the Titan cooldown, or amped weapons, increasing the damage output of their on-foot equipment for a short time. A by this point standard leveling system was also present, with each level bestowing new equipment and loadouts for both pilot and Titans. There's nothing revolutionary here, nothing that hadn't been done before in Call of Duty and dozens of other games by 2014, but that's fine. Modern Warfare set the standard of how online multiplayer would be, at least until Overwatch came along and reminded us how good Team Fortress 2 was. The player base is unfortunately very low now. This isn't really surprising with it being a 7-year-old game at this point, with a sequel out that improves upon it in pretty much every way. That being said, I had no issues finding a game, at least on Xbox, with minimal wait time to join lobbies. Being on Game Pass on Xbox probably helps the player count a little, as well as it finally hitting Steam in 2020 after being stuck on Origin for its entire life cycle. All in all, it's eerily similar to pretty much any Call of Duty game, albeit now with big stompy robots, faster and more responsive movement, and a marginally less disgusting publisher. Though, only just. Shortly after the release of Titanfall in 2014, development started on its sequel. The original game sold very well, in part due to it being a launch window title for the Xbox One that released a few months prior, in November of the previous year. However, one issue frequently cited with the original was the lack of any single-player content. This, it was believed, was a contributing factor to the low continued engagement of players after release. I would argue that while the lack of single-player content definitely did hurt the game, it was lack of any real variation in game types until much later in its life cycle that caused players to leave. Players simply got bored, and with a new Call of Duty releasing every year, which offered multiplayer that wasn't all that dissimilar, as well as a campaign and a horde mode style offering. Advanced Warfare released 8 months after Titanfall, and while it didn't have mechs as such, it was set in a similar environment with a much larger emphasis on mobility than the previous titles. It really wasn't surprising that people jumped ship relatively soon after launch. People will gravitate towards what they know, and in the multiplayer first-person shooter space, people know Call of Duty. Zampella confirmed a single-player campaign would be present in the sequel, stating that he hoped it would increase the player base of the game, but hoped to make it different from other first-person shooters on the market, notably Call of Duty. Given that a large chunk of Respawn's staff had previously worked for Infinity Ward, this would prove to be, initially at least, quite difficult. Developers were free to create prototypes of ideas that focused on gameplay, and while they had to stay within the constraints of already established mechanics, they were free to do more or less as they pleased. During this time, prototypes were stitched together to create a movie-like sequence, with plot details being added in later. The flexibility of the engine helped to make all of this possible. As previously, Titanfall 2 was developed with the Source engine, made famous by Half-Life 2. A 2:1:1 ratio of pilot combat, pilot movement and puzzles, and Titan combat became the general structure of sections. With the pilot movement and platforming being the most noteworthy mentions, combat generally felt the same as the original game, but the movement was expanded upon. Pilot mobility specifically got a bit of an overhaul. It feels fundamentally the same, but it's tighter now and more responsive. The moveset has been expanded as well. Wall running and double jumps remained, but now there's a slide while sprinting that can be used to chain together wall runs and jumps, giving a pretty hefty speed boost and a general increase in mobility across the board. The addition of the slide manages to retroactively make the first game's movement feel slow and clunky. Levels are designed around being able to quickly transition from wall to slide to wall again, around corners, over gaps and over terrain, chain together fast movement combos. It's incredibly exhilarating when it's done right, and for the most part, Titanfall 2 does it right. A decade of stagnation in the genre had gone the way of most major first-person shooters, focusing all of their effort on multiplayer and just tacking a story on. Most Call of Duty games after Modern Warfare 2 have felt that way to me, and Battlefield has always felt like the single player was just a needlessly long tutorial for the multiplayer in every instance other than Bad Company 2. Hearing that Respawn had decided to include a story left me with the same feelings initially, expecting a decent if all too familiar multiplayer experience with a shallow story tacked on. And while it turned out to be somewhat correct when describing the multiplayer, the story of Titanfall 2 was one of the most pleasant surprises of 2016. Actually no, scratch that. It was one of the most pleasant surprises of the entire 8th console generation. The campaign is set 5 years after the events of the original, with the militia having pushed the IMC back significantly and have them on the defensive, with the player occupying the boots of Private Jack Cooper, a rifleman in the militia and receiving pilot training from Captain Lastimosa. A short tutorial mission sets the scene and introduces the new mechanics, an assault course that can be repeated to reduce the time on the leaderboard before getting thrown to the first mission prompt. Should sound familiar to anyone who's played Modern Warfare. Once the tutorial is complete, the invasion of Typhon, an IMC planet in the frontier, begins. Upon drop podding onto the planet, Cooper is almost immediately knocked unconscious by the Apex Predators, a mercenary unit in the employ of the IMC, only to be saved by Lastimosa, who is quickly overcome.
You're in bad shape. Hold on. This might knock you out, but you should be okay when you wake up.
Lastimosa, hostile Titans inbound.
With his dying breath, Lastimosa transfers control of his Titan, BT-7274, over to Cooper, entrusting him with his final mission. Rendezvous with Major Anderson for further instructions? Congratulations, you're now a pilot. Your first duty is to get BT back to operational status. 2 cells are required from nearby crashed ships in order to do this. The journey to and from these eases the player into the free-running and on-foot combat that's going to be the majority of the experience. The rest of the level serves as a second tutorial. This time to Titan combat and abilities, accumulating with a 1v1 battle with an IMC pilot. Throughout all of this, BT is in contact with Cooper, explaining the situation and subtly guiding him along.
Long time no see, BT.
On the contrary, your helmet provided me with a live feed of your actions. You fought well out there, pilot. The controls to deactivate much lower.
The back and forth between the two is the main narrative vehicle of the game, and honestly it works really well. The relationship between the two builds over time and is genuinely presented in a believable way. Around the midpoint of the game, having just restored communications and power to a substation by climbing a huge interstellar beacon and realigning the dish, contact is made with the militia fleet. BT informs Commander Briggs of Lastimosa's unfortunate death and that a rifleman, Cooper, is now his pilot. Briggs is initially shocked at this, unable to believe that Lastimosa linked his Titan to a mere rifleman, even under the extreme circumstances, and vows to get BT linked to a fully fledged pilot. BT immediately rejects this, stating that Cooper is his pilot now, and the two have an effective combat efficiency rating. Briggs reluctantly agrees to this, and the two continue on their way.
Our combat effectiveness rating now exceeds 90%. Request permission to retain this link.
You're lucky our backs are up against the wall, BT. Permission granted. That's high praise coming from a machine, Cooper.
I'm not going to go too in-depth into the intricacies of the story so as not to spoil it, but while there are no major plot twists to speak of, and it's not going to win a Pulitzer Prize for its depths of writing, it is done in a very compelling manner. If I had to criticise it, then the length is probably a reasonable place to start. A first playthrough on normal is probably going to only take the average player 5 or 6 hours to get through, and that's been pretty generous. Now that I've beaten the game a few times, getting through it in under 3 hours is a breeze, and speedrunners are down around the hour mark. Nothing really feels like it's been cut though. The story is tight and to the point. It doesn't feel like there's any filler. I can't think of any specific levels that stand out as being unnecessary or tacked on, and likewise I can't think of anything that feels obviously missing, be it from gameplay or from a narrative perspective. There's likely not a huge amount of replayability either, aside from speedrunning or grabbing the few collectible helmets that are scattered around the maps, and even then this doesn't unlock anything other than a couple of achievements. The single player is short, but it is outstanding. The Ultimate Edition has found its way to being a budget title of sorts now. At full price on Steam it's only $24.99, and that includes all of the released DLC packs, and is frequently in sales on all 3 platforms for under $5. At that price I can fully recommend it, even if you're only interested in checking out the store. It's also on Game Pass for Xbox and PC, as well as EA Play, so there's plenty of opportunities to give it a try for basically nothing if you haven't activated the trial for any of these services yet. Fundamentally, the multiplayer of Titanfall 2 is the same as the first. It has an emphasis on fast movement for pilots and massive firepower for Titans, and each match is constantly changing asymmetry as Titans come and go from the field. Only now there's a little more depth to the leveling and customization systems. There are double the number of Titans to choose from now, each with their own abilities and weaponry and all play subtly different, to fill all the different battlefield roles. Titans are no longer on a timer, with objectives and kills being required to build up a meter rather than wait an arbitrary amount of time. The burn cards are now gone too, replaced with boosts. A lot of these are similar in nature to the cards, such as amped weapons, and are available to equip to a pilot. 6 DLCs released over the course of Titanfall 2's life. Counter to how the first game did it, all of these are free as content updates rather than map packs, each bringing new maps, Titans, game modes and weapons, etc. Additionally, paid DLCs adding cosmetics were also released, but it didn't affect the game's balance or population in any way. Frontier Defense mode from the original game made a return in one of these updates, adding a much needed PvE alternative to the game, being a wave-based horde mode style offering. I honestly much prefer this way of doing things, least of all because it's free, but it also shows a genuine effort to keep the multiplayer community together and not splinter it with map packs, fracturing the player base. Critically, Titanfall 2 was a huge success, receiving high 8 and 9s out of 10 across the board. Unfortunately though, this didn't translate particularly well to high sales. The first-person shooter market is notoriously overshadowed every year by the monoliths of Call of Duty and Battlefield, the latter of which being another EA-published IP. So EA's decision to release Titanfall 2 at the end of October 2016, a week after Battlefield 1 and a week before Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, is a little confusing. The game ended up being the 9th best-selling game in October, far behind Call of Duty and Battlefield, only selling a quarter of the copies that the original did in their launch week. Impressive for all the wrong reasons when you consider that the series had gone multi-platform for this release, rather than an Xbox exclusive. EA predicted sales of 10 million units in the first year of sale for Titanfall 2, but unfortunately, they haven't released any official figures on units sold that I can find, but it's reported to have sold around 4 to 5 million units across its lifetime. Did EA learn anything from this? Probably not, but it doesn't look like we're getting Titanfall 3 anytime soon. But wait, Titanfall isn't dead yet. Sort of. With the popularity of Fortnite and PUBG, EA decided to jump on the live service gravy train. Releasing in early 2019, Apex Legends is a free-to-play battle royale developed by Respawn and set in the Titanfall universe, complete with all the usual features like seasons, cosmetics and a battle pass. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about Apex, because honestly you've probably played it already by now, and if not, you're certainly aware of it. Development started sometime in 2016 in secret, long before Fortnite and Warzone had taken the world by storm. It's unknown whether it was originally intended to be a Battle Royale title, or was intended to be Titanfall 3, but it is clear that Respawn and EA had plans for the series, even after the relatively poor sales of the last game. It follows a similar formula to the 2 aforementioned games. A bunch of people squad up and get catapulted into a huge, sprawling map and try to be the last one standing. The links to Titanfall are at least initially superficial. There are no Titans in the game, and Respawn repeatedly confirms that they won't ever be coming to it. Just a bunch of characters that have backstory linking them to the game. For example, Bangalore was previously a member of the IMC and references it in the game. Ash, one of the boss fights, was featured during a Season 5 quest, albeit as a robot version of herself. And Cuban Blisk, the primary antagonist and leader of the Apex Predators, is mentioned in the game, it being theorised that he's the founder and organiser of the Apex games. Apex Legends is a decent entry into the Battle Royale space. The Steam version at least consistently has a couple of 100,000 players on at any one time. Combine that with the Origin and console releases, all of which are crossplay, then it's safe to say that it's probably going to be around for a while. EA seems to be into the idea as well. Unsurprisingly, as in the 2020 fiscal year, it made them $600 million. Is that what people want from the franchise though? With figures as vast as that, it's difficult to argue against it, especially from EA's side of things. Why would they take a risk on a third mainline game, when even if it does well, it's likely not going to be anywhere near as successful for them as Apex? In July 2021, the Apex Legends servers were hacked, locking players out of games and leading them to a message that directed them to a website simply titled Save Titanfall. The original game had essentially been unplayable on PC for a while, due to a hacker constantly taking down the servers. This has affected Titanfall 2 as well, though to a lesser degree. An online-only game having no functioning servers is obviously a problem, especially when that game is still being sold on Steam and Origin, effectively allowing people to buy a product that does not work. The hack was an attempt to bring issues to Respawn's attention, though they commented several months before on them, but nothing seemed to have been done. For now though, the issue seems to have been fixed. I reinstalled the game on PC and seemed to get on okay. How long this lasts though remains to be seen. It's somewhat understandable that a 7-year-old game with a tiny population isn't getting a huge amount of support anymore, but at the same time, if they're still selling it for money, then a baseline level of functionality should be provided. If EA and Respawn aren't willing to provide that, then they should pull the game from sale. So, should you play the Titanfall games today? The first one is kind of a hard sell right now. The population is low, it has no single player, and the servers are in a constant state of flux. That being said, it's very cheap generally, and the season pass is now free for all owners. You can pick up the console version for basically nothing on eBay now, and while it might end up being dead again by the time your copy arrives, there isn't much of an investment necessarily to try it. 2 is a much easier sell. It's regularly just as cheap on Steam and both consoles as the first. All the DLC, or at least the DLC that matters, is free. The campaign is nothing short of excellent, but it's a fleeting kind of excellence, and unless you're into the speedrunning scene, it doesn't have a huge amount of replay value beyond just playing it again just because. The multiplayer is still doing pretty well, and doesn't have anywhere near the issues the first game does, and there's plenty of map and mode variety at this point. The re-edition of Frontier Defense means you can get a game even when the population dies down a little bit, due to the low requirement of players required to start. Statistically, you're all already playing Apex Legends, so I probably don't need to recommend that. So yeah, go play some Titanfall. I swear the next thing I talk about won't involve Infinity Ward or Call of Duty. Probably. If you managed to get this far into the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, it really does help. What should I play next? Do you have a favourite game or game series that you think I should check out? Let me know in the comments what I should talk about next.